Every now and then, a comment on one of these explainers just stops you in your tracks. Someone asked a question that, honestly, has haunted history for generations. Who truly owns Holy Land? And wow, that question, it just cuts right through all the noise, doesn't it? It goes straight to the heart of one of the most painful conflicts on Earth. So yeah, let's dive into this.
Was Palestine stolen through diplomacy, war, and foreign greed? That's the rest of it. And you realize this isn't just about politics, right? This is about 100 years of broken promises, of traumas crashing into each other, and what it even means to have a home. To really answer it, we have to look into a past that is so much more complicated, so much more morally gray than we're usually told. So, who truly owns the Holy Land? To even begin to answer that, we can't start with today's headlines. It just won't work. We have to go back, way back. We need to become historical detectives and figure out how this whole struggle was actually engineered, long before the state of Israel was even a reality.
Now, what's fascinating is that the roots of this specific conflict aren't really in ancient texts. They're much more modern. They're in the engine room of the 20th century, the collapse of a massive empire and the rise of another one with its own strategic plans. Our story really kicks off right in the wreckage of the Ottoman Empire, just after World War I.
So for centuries under the Ottomans, this land, Palestine, was this incredible tapestry of faiths. You had Arabs, Jews, Christians all living together. People's identities were tied to their communities, to their holy sites, not to the idea of a modern nation with, sharp, clean borders on a map. Look, it wasn't perfect. There were tensions, for sure, but there was also this really complex system of coexistence.
But then, the Ottoman Empire collapses, and a new global power steps onto the stage, Great Britain. As Britain moved in to control this incredibly strategic region, they made a very, very calculated decision. They basically lit a slow-burning fuse. How? By promising the exact same piece of land to two completely different groups of people.
I mean, just look at this. It's what I call Britain's promise trap. On one side, you have the promise to the Arabs. Help us defeat the Ottomans and you'll get your independence. A huge deal. But then on the other side, you have the Balfour Declaration, which promised a national home for the Jewish people in that same land. It was a strategic devil deal, a trap. It's hard to look at this and not see how it made future conflict almost inevitable. And this is the theme we'll keep coming back to. Every modern border, every conflict was being shaped by these outside powers.
So you fast forward a few decades. The world goes through another, even more horrific world war. And once again, the fate of this land is being decided by strangers, in a room thousands of miles away. The decision was literally taken out of the hands of the people who actually lived there and put on the world stage, at the brand new United Nations. Okay, so let's just quickly trace how we got here. It starts with the Ottoman Empire gone. Then you have nearly 30 years of British rule where those two promises are just making tensions boil over. And then the Holocaust. An absolutely unimaginable horror that creates this massive global pressure, this moral imperative for a safe haven, a state for the Jewish people. All of that pressure culminates in one moment, the UN partition vote in 1947. So in 1947, the United Nations comes up with what it thinks is a solution. The plan is simple, on paper at least. Partition the land, draw a line down the map, and create two new states, one for Arabs, one for Jews. And to the rest of the world looking in, it probably seemed pretty logical, a fair compromise, right? Well, here's the problem on the ground, and this chart really lays it bare. At the time, the Arab population was the clear majority, but the UN plan gave the majority of the land, and not just any land, the most fertile, valuable land, to the Jewish population, which was the minority. So for the people living there, this didn't feel like a fair compromise at all. It felt like yet another foreign power just giving away land that didn't belong to them. And this is the moment everything fractures. Arab leaders look at this plan and they reject it completely. They see it as just more colonialism, the final betrayal. But for the Jewish people, who were literally emerging from the ashes of the Holocaust, this plan was seen as the only path to survival, the only way to guarantee a future. So one side says an emphatic no, the other says a desperate yes. And right there in that divide, the stage is set for war. With diplomacy completely off the table, the conflict turns from political to military. All those seeds of contradiction, the ones planted by empires and drawn on maps by strangers, they finally, violently erupt. This is the 1948 war. So, the moment the British pull out, it happens. Jewish leaders declare the State of Israel, and almost immediately, the armies of 5 neighboring Arab countries invade. The war that breaks out, it does more than just draw new borders on a map. It forges brand new national identities, and it sears these deep, deep traumas that are going to define the entire region for the next 100 years.
And from this one single war, 2 completely different, totally irreconcilable stories are born. For Israelis, it's the War of Independence. It's a fight for their very survival against all odds, a miracle, the birth of their nation. But for Palestinians, the very same event is known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. It's the moment that over 700,000 people either fled or were forced from their homes. Their entire world turned upside down as they became refugees. And the hardest part to grasp is that both of these stories are absolutely true to the people who live them.
But here's the thing, 1948 wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a cycle, a really painful cycle. It created this deep moral paradox that's all tangled up in the human need to survive. And that paradox, it's what's been powering this conflict ever since. Because history isn't just something you read about in a book. For the people there, it's a living wound. The trauma from that war has been passed down from parent to child for generations on both sides. And all that inherited grief, it's been fueled and sometimes weaponized by those same outside powers we talked about, with Cold War alliances, with money, with weapons. All of it just keeps the cycle spinning.
And this brings us to what might be the most difficult, most uncomfortable question in this entire story. It's a question that really forces you to move beyond easy labels of good guys and bad guys. Can a people fleeing oppression, fleeing the absolute worst humanity has to offer, can they, in their totally justified search for safety, unintentionally end up recreating a system of suffering for someone else?
Look, when you really follow the thread of this story, all the way from a British Empire's cynical promise to a modern superpower's military aid, you're left with a pretty brutal truth about how history really works. History rarely offers up pure innocence. There are no simple heroes in this story. What you find instead are competing claims, clashing traumas. You find generations of people who were backed into impossible corners, forced to make impossible choices, often because of decisions made by outsiders who would never, ever have to live with the consequences. Think about it. The most basic human needs, for safety, for faith, for a connection to your land, all of that was taken and twisted by imperial games, by diplomatic double talk, until it became one of the most emotionally explosive and painful conflicts the world has ever seen. And in the end, that original comment that started this whole thing, maybe it was asking the wrong question. Maybe it's not about who owns the land. Maybe the real question is how people can ever learn to share a home that has been so deeply haunted by a history that didn't create any heroes, only survivors.